So the first concept we have to discuss is the difference between damage per rotation and damage per second. Most people, when they do spreadsheet calculations, they tend to look at damage per rotation. So if we take a classic team of Verena, Mortefi, and Gian, then you do your whole rotation and you use the echoes, which are recommended by most people. So you would use the Heron echo on Mortefi and the monkey forecast echo on GN, right? Because they give you like extra attack percentage, they give you extra damage boost, heavy attack boost, all that. So you do your rotation and then you get a certain amount of damage from your full rotation. But what most people don't do is that they don't look at the actual time it takes to complete the rotation, right? So if you look at actual damage per second, swapping out those forecast echoes, which give you like, you know, the percentage based damage and attack boosts, it's actually like going to increase your DPS because the animation takes so long for those echoes. So it might seem outrageous and very counterintuitive, and it is counterintuitive, but let's say that you have a 30-second rotation if you use these echoes. And let's say that the animation for the monkey takes like 3 seconds, the animation for the heron takes another 3 seconds, so that's 6 seconds that you have, right? If you swap these echoes for summon echoes, you lose around, let's say, in like if you actually do the math, the calculations, then you lose around 10-12% damage by swapping out those two echoes. But you actually also lose like 6 seconds off your rotation time. And even though you do 10% less damage, the time it takes to complete your rotation is pretty much like 20% less. So if you do, let's say, in 10 seconds you do 100 damage, and then in 7 seconds you do 90 damage, what's better, right? So like the second scenario is going to be more DPS. I know it's counterintuitive, but that is how it actually works. Another reason why having shorter rotations is better in Wuthering Waves is because, especially against hologram boss fights, you don't really have very big openings where you can actually do your damage. So making sure that you can front load as much damage as possible or cut down your rotation time by as much as possible is going to lead to you doing actually more damage in practice. So you're not always going to be able to do your full rotation against the bosses. So just because on a spreadsheet it says that, you know, this is the perfectly calculated, I don't know, max damage DPS rotation if you have 35 seconds on your hands and if the enemy doesn't move for 35 seconds, which literally never happens. So that's another reason why having shorter rotations is very important in Wuthering Waves and being able to front load your damage. This is also why transform echoes are generally speaking worse than summon echoes. So what's the difference between transform and summon echoes? So transform echoes are like crownless, I don't know, the monkey echo, like anything which actually makes your character transform into the echo, do an attack, and then transform back. And you can do like quick swap shenanigans with these echoes. So like you use the echo skill, then you swap to another character, and then, you know, you technically cut down the recovery time. But generally speaking, if you want to, like, you know, maximize your rotations DPS output, then you're going to want to be using summon echoes. Because I don't know how many of you guys ever played fighting games, but in team fighting games where you have assist calls, summon echoes are basically the equivalent of assist calls. So, and if you've played team fighting games, then you know how broken assist calls are, just from a utility standpoint. So that's basically why, generally speaking, using summon echoes is going to be better than using transform echoes. Another thing a lot of people are doing is extending their rotations by making sure that they get the outro skill. For example, for Verena, they want to get the outro skill to proc every single time during their rotation because it gives them like a 20-something% damage buff, or 15%, I don't know, it gives a damage buff, right? And the time you spend on Verena in order to proc that buff actually extends your rotation by so much most of the time. Not always, like, you know, very often you might end up rotating back into Verena. her concerto gauge is already like, you know, 3/4 full, then it's pretty easy to charge it. But if it's like at the start of, for example, a Tower of Adversity run, and her concerto gauge is completely empty, and then you just start the rotation on her and keep trying to build it, then it's basically going to cut so much into your DPS that the 15% damage buff is not worth it. So if you can cut your rotation time to, let's say, 20 seconds instead of 30 seconds, and skip out on being on Verena for so long, and then just get the outro skill buff every second rotation, that's again going to be a net overall DPS increase. You might do less damage during one of your rotations, but if you check the overall DPS, you will be getting more damage. And the reason why it's actually not as important as you think to get those outro skill buffs every single time, the ones that buff stuff like heavy attack damage on Mortefi, like that's pretty substantial. Like 38%, yeah, that is substantial, so it's pretty important to get it. Plus, charging Mortefi's concerto gauge is pretty fast, especially if you have the Cadenza weapon or whatever it's called, the one that gives you extra concerto gauge when you do a resonance skill. So those are substantial, but generally speaking, if I'm talking mostly about the healer outro buffs, so Baijis and Verenas, if you have to skip one rotation during which you don't get their outro buff, so that you spend less time on the character, then that's usually going to be an overall DPS increase. And I'm speaking from a practical standpoint because, for example, yesterday I was doing Tower of Adversity runs, and I was doing the 4th floor on the first tower in Hazard Zone against the Tempest Mephis. So you first have like the Wave of Exiles, and then you have the Tempest Mephis, right? And I was trying to get a clear so that I can clear it in under with over 2 minutes remaining, so that I get the 2 stars. And I did do that before the reset, but now I was struggling, and I forgot it's because I used a different rotation where I didn't stay on Verena to make sure to charge her outro skill previously. And now when I remember that, I did that again, and I could easily get the clear with 2 stars. So, like, in practice it works. It may not look like that on a spreadsheet, but in actual practice your DPS will be higher. And it's the same with using the, for example, the bird echo on GN, the one which, you know, parries the opponent's attacks and is really fast startup animation. It takes very, very low time out of your rotation compared to the monkey, which is very slow, and it does give you a damage boost, but the damage boost is inconsequential. And the reason why it's inconsequential is because these types of damage and attack boosts, they are additive with every other damage and attack boost of the same type. So for example, if you already have extra attack percentage, then let's say going from 30% extra attack percentage to 42% extra attack percentage, so an extra 12%, is not going to be as much of an increase as if you went from 0 to 12, right? So the more you have of a certain type of attack or damage boost, or, you know, crit rate, crit damage, all that stuff, the more you have, the less it actually matters when you get a bit more. So this is why if you skip a rotation on getting Verena's outro skill, for example, you might get more damage. So the reason I made this video is because of a comment I received on another video of mine, which I previously made, where they asked about whether I would be okay to talk about like my thoughts on team compositions and optimal team compositions. And I will be making a video about that, but I just wanted to get this one quickly out of the way so that you guys understand the premise of how I look at DPS and how I look at rotations. I approach it more from a practical point of view and less so from like a, you know, theory crafting. And the reason for that is because like I have a background in sports, and in sports, especially sports like boxing, all the theory, you can have all the theory in the world, like, you know, but once you get to the fight, you actually have to put it into practice, and it often falls apart. So you're going to be just, you know, doing whatever you can to make the most of the situation. And in these games as well, it's the same basically. Like, you know, you get to a boss fight and then you have to make the most of the situation with what you're with what's available to you. And I mean, it's obviously not the exact same because there is no like PvP component, but generally speaking, you get what I'm saying, right? So it's not that complicated. But yeah, so like, comment, subscribe, and all that stuff. If you liked the video, if you didn't, then, you know, leave a dislike. That's also fine. But yeah, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one, or more boss fights, character guides, and all that stuff. So I will be making that video about my thoughts about the team compositions, probably either later today or tomorrow. I'll see if I can get around to ranting about that and collect my thoughts on the subject. So yeah, I'm Dr. Misk. Until next time, peace!